So hello friends, now we will start the discussion on the remaining questions of test 10. We have discussed 3 questions, one on presidential activism, other on judiciary and third on parliament. In those answers, I would suggest that if you can also emphasize on the needed reforms, especially in judiciary, if you can list down bringing transparency, accountability, infrastructure, increasing the number of judges, and same in case of parliament, if you can emphasize on electoral reforms and write little bit more elaborately on the reform angle, that will also add value to your answer. So now I will do the next question. The next question is question number 4, and it says, first of all, explain the concept of coalition government. First thing. Second thing is they are asking us to explicate the features of India's coalition culture. And the question also demands that you explain with reference to recent examples. Fine. So how to build the answer of this question? First of all, understand what are the vital components of it. So I will have to write a paragraph on the coalition government, and while explaining the concept of coalition government, I will refer two scholars. One I will refer the Ricker, and other I will refer Professor Og. Fine. So whenever you will have to write the conceptual questions, it is advisable to give inputs from the theoreticians, and it is not necessary that you write literally whatever word by word. You have to not show that you remember the things, you have to show that you understand the things and you can put the ideas in your own words. Next is explicate the features of India's coalition culture. So I must first explain what do I mean by coalition culture. So coalition culture basically means how has been the practice of coalition in at the national level, you can talk about it, at the state levels. And when I have to explicate the features in Indian politics, always advisable to take a comparative view. Fine. So basically, as you know, Indian politics is understood, or Indian politics is studied and researched in America and Western countries under the part of comparative government and politics. So if you will adopt comparative approach, that is going to be good. So we will have some comparisons. So comparisons we will do from the countries of continental Europe, for example Germany, a good example, and Italy, example of unstable coalitions coming near to, this is near to India's culture, and Germany is an example where India should learn and improve. Fine. And while explicating the features of India's coalition culture, we can give the very brief history of the coalition experiment. Fine. And if we have to make our answer look little bit theoretical and authentic, I will add the views of some scholars. First is, you can add Vidyut Chakravarti, you can add Paul Wallace, you can give reference to Christophe Jeffrey Lott, you can also give reference to Suhas Palashikar. Fine, a very well-known name in coalition experiment. Now, two recent examples are asking. So, two recent examples we can give. Example from Karnataka and example of Maharashtra. Fine. So Karnataka, where Kumaraswamy lost and Yedurappa formed the government, and Maharashtra, the parties who were fighting against each other, they are coming together. Fine. So these are two experiments or examples, but we can also give the classical examples here, that of West Bengal and Kerala. Fine. Now, what is the way forward? What is the what should be the conclusion in this answer? The conclusion should be, on the conclusion I can build on 2 points. First point will be whether coalition is desirable or not, and second, what reforms are needed in coalition culture. Fine. So whenever you write any answer, first try to highlight the important points, and you see there are so many points that we can easily write an answer of 300, 400, 450 words. Okay, and this is how, see, any time a question on coalition comes, this much information will always be enough. Okay, so if you have copies, you can note down some key ideas, some key facts, be ready with that, and then we will utilize it for writing the answer. Okay, so in your copies you can just this, as far as the concept of coalition is concerned, we will refer Professor Ogg, and Professor Ogg gives a very simple definition of coalition government. The idea is that you should communicate to your examiner that you understand the important scholars associated with a particular domain. First the general and then in context of India particular. So there's nothing very unique in his definition. His definition is very simple, but as a convention we normally start with his definition. So what is his definition of coalition? So he defines coalition as a cooperative arrangement among political parties when no single party is able to form government on its own. So there is nothing, even if you remember his views and just write the general theme, then also it's fine. Then Ricker has explained it more analytically, and Ricker explains coalitions as a power sharing arrangements. So in class I have explained power sharing arrangements, and this is more from behavioral approach. Fine. And now next we will write what is the opinion of some scholars. For example, Vidyut Chakravarti. You can write the title of his recent book on coalition. For value addition, forging power. Coalition. And in notes use different color pens. Before exam just revise this much and you can write answer. Forging power, coalition, politics in India, Oxford Publications. So this much is enough, and the main idea is that his analysis is till that of 2014, and his idea is that because India is very diverse country, it is very natural that India will have the regional parties and the coalition governments. So what is the highlight? What is the theme of his analysis? The highlight of his analysis is, you have to just remember that he emphasized that because of diversity, coalition is natural. And in this book basically he has traced the history of coalition governments. So you can just give the idea that you know about the recent scholarly work. The work is primarily about the historical evolution, and the main thesis of Vidyut Chakravarti is that coalition is going to be a permanent feature because of diversity. Okay. Now here I can also give reference to another scholar who writes now, Suhas Palashikar. Now Suhas Palishkar is a most well-known name in India with respect to the analysis on party system, coalition government, party politics. And Suhas Palashikar, there is no specific article, but in general you can say that he is of the opinion that this 2014 elections have put a temporary break, quite contrary, and 2019 is showing that democracy is moving towards majoritarian model, because people have not been happy with the way coalition governments have practiced. Now, two more scholars, one Paul Wallace. His view is more on the coalition culture, and Paul Wallace calls India's coalitions as catch-all coalitions. The best example of catch-all coalitions, you can say Maharashtra's Mahagadi, where NCP, Congress and Shiv Sena has combined together. Another scholar you can mention about is Christophe Jeffrey Lott, and you can mention about his article in Indian Express with the title Coalition Country. And here also he emphasized that India is a civilizational state, and that is why there is a diversity and coalition is inevitable. So what is the main theme of his articles that you have to remember? 2 points emphasize: India is a civilizational state. So civilizational state versus nation state. Fine. How to understand? France is a nation state, means it is homogeneous. It is a state of a French speaking people. Whereas civilizational states like India, China, where people belonging to different religions, language, ethnic groups live. So India is a civilizational state. This points towards the diversity, and these two things, ultimately the civilizational states, make India also a coalition country. Okay. So regarding Suhas Palashikar, you can give reference to his article in seminar Politics in the Age of Hegemony, or you can just leave it. So with these ingredients we will try to write our answer. Okay. So now let us come to the question. So for every answer, prepare a basic information which forms the basic or structure of your answer. So first part is explain the concept of coalition government. Fine. So how will I explain? I will explain that coalition government is defined by Professor Og as whatever we have discussed, as when no single party has a majority to form the government of its own. Fine. After this, I will write my understanding and I will give some very basic information. So here what I will write? I will write that coalition governments are the features of parliamentary form of government. This is how I will explain that even I understand parliamentary form of government, because in such systems executive is represented by the party having majority in lower house. In any way you just explain, and then in case of a hung assembly, when no party is able to achieve majority on its own, the coalition emerges. Okay, and then in the third paragraph I will mention, or in the third paragraph I will mention that Professor Ricker explains coalition as a phenomena of power politics, when he described it as a power sharing arrangement. Okay, if you want you can also write that Professor Ricker using behavioral approach explains this. So this is how we will tackle, explain the concept of the coalition government. Now coming to the second part of the question, so mind to change the paragraph. Explicate the salient features of India's coalition culture. Fine. So next is explication we have to do. Explicate the salient features of India's coalition culture. So always whenever a particular term is there, you are expected to define that term. Fine. This will show why should we define the term, because this shows our level of understanding of the things. And when I define coalition culture, this also like how I am going to analyze the coalition culture, what will come in that framework of analysis. Okay, so let us understand the features of India's coalition culture. Now here I cannot directly jump on explaining the features of India's coalition culture. Why I should not directly jump? Because it is very important to maintain the continuity of thoughts. Fine. Writers or paragraph you change, but nothing should come as a shock. The transition from one paragraph to the other paragraph should be very smooth transition. Fine. So I will not abruptly start writing, see, these are the features of coalition culture, that's all. No, I will start with the little bit, a brief history of the coalition government in India. So when I will write the brief history, my smartness is I will use Vidyut Chakravarti's reference. It's not that I have to read that book. Everybody has a broad idea. So I can just refer that Professor Vidyut Chakravarti in his book Forging Power has discussed the evolution of coalition experiment. Okay. So explicating the salient features, I will start. I have to write what is going on in mind. I have to write history and then I will come to the features. Fine. So, but to write history, I will start with Professor Vidyut Chakraborty in his book Forging Power, Coalition Politics in India. Fine. Traces. And what does he do? We will also write this. Traces the evolution of coalition politics till 2014 elections. Okay. And what is his view? And he believes that because of diversity and rejection of melting pot approach, diversity and the rejection of melting pot approach, there is growth of regional parties and this makes coalition inevitable. Okay, because don't write any scholar for the sake of writing. You should write a scholar from with a context, एक perspective में लिखना है. So if I know the scholars, I should also know where should I use these scholars. Okay, and after this I will use the next scholar here only, Christophe Jeffrey Lott. Christophe Jeffrey Lott in his article Coalition Country. ठीक है, also comes to the similar idea that because India is a civilizational state, unlike France, which is a nation state, India can also be seen as a coalition country because of the inevitability of the coalition politics. Okay. After this, I will give some analysis of coalition government. I will also highlight some features of coalition. Okay, so what I write, so I will say that the India has a long experience in coalitions. Because we do not have time, but in this article he also gives an example of how Ashoka maintained an empire by building the coalitions, how Akbar maintained empire by building the coalitions, but right now we do not require. So India has a long experience, and we can also say that the Congress party, fine. So India was ruled by Congress. It was a one party system or a Congress system. So Congress party was itself a grand coalition. Was itself a grand coalition. And if you want, you can refer that according to Professor Rajni Kothari, it was a rainbow coalition. Fine. Next, Janata Party government is another short experiment of coalition. Fine. Then you should also write that in formal sense, in a formal sense, coalition experiment at a national level, coalition and minority government at a national level started from 1989 onwards and continued till 2014. Fine. So 2014 and 2019 also are called as coalition governments, technically speaking, but Suhas Palashikar uses this word surplus coalitions. Fine. So BJP is able to make a government on its own, call it as a surplus coalitions, because they do not exist. Next, you can say that coalition experiment has been more, because the question is asking with the example from the two recent cases. Fine. So you have to link it with the state. So you can always say that the coalition experiment, या formal coalition experiment in India is much older. Fine. And the coalition politics in states like Kerala and West Bengal, in a state like Kerala, gives an example of a mature coalition culture. Fine. Now after that, what I will write, I will give some idea about the coalition government, which type of government. So I will say that though coalition governments are criticized, if you want you can write that though coalition governments are criticized for instability, yet they offset majoritarianism. They offset majoritarianism and give rise to, see, keywords always underline this, give rise to consociational democracy. Democracy based on consensus. Okay, now I will have to shift quickly towards the coalition culture or the practice. Fine, coalition culture or the practice. So, who are the important scholars who have also written on the coalition culture, the coalition practice? Besides this, if you do not remember these scholars, you can also mention about Professor M.P. Singh, Sudha Pai and Zoya Hassan. They also write on party politics. Fine. But coalition culture, or let us say coalition politics. So, I will give reference to certain scholars who have analyzed India's coalition culture. So, I will say that scholars like Suhas Palashikar, Sudha Pai, Professor M.P. Singh, Paul Wallace, Vidyut Chakravarti have analyzed India's coalition culture. Okay, and I will primarily focus my answer on analysis of Vidyut Chakravarti, which we have discussed in the class notes also, and he has taken, always highlight the highlight the methodology of a scholar. So what you can say, that Professor Vidyut Chakravarti took a comparative perspective, to explicate. It is always advised to bring the some words which is mentioned into the question to explicate the features of, to explicate the distinctive features of India's coalition culture. Fine. And then you can write what he says, that in India, in West, his main concept is that in West there are coalitions by design. That is, there is some ideological congruence. Fine. Whereas in India, what you see? You see that coalition is in search of design. Fine. Coalition is in search of design. This is his keyword. See, in answers we cannot write everything. So we have to be selective and you have to find out what is the most catchy thing that you can write. So in search of design. Now because the question is asking explain with reference to some recent examples. So why not I fit in here itself? Okay, fine. Search in search of design. Now what does this mean that there is no design? If you take the example of Maharashtra, anybody is making coalitions with anyone, right, left, anyone can combine. So there is no design, there is no grand idea which is informing the coalition politics in India other than what the Ricker is saying, nothing but a power sharing arrangement. Okay, so coalition in search of design. So here we will again add the views of Paul Wallace, and Paul Wallace calls Indian coalitions as catch-all coalitions. Fine. So Maharashtra, Agadi, Parshad and all, what does that explain? A catch-all coalitions. So we have done this concept of catch-all parties. So there is a catch-all coalition word used by Paul Wallace in Indian context. Now it's not that you just keep on referring the scholars and without giving your own understanding. So again you should write the essence of it. Fine. So all these things show that now write from try to show your understanding always after writing, giving reference to the scholars, you should show that you understand the main theme. So what does it is showing? It is showing that coalitions in India lack a grand theme and they are nothing but power sharing arrangements. Fine. And you can give the example. For example, if we see the recent coalition in Maharashtra where Shiv Sena, NCP and Congress have combined Maha Agadi Vikas Sangathan or something, Maha Agadi. Fine. Okay, and you can say that NCP is a breakout faction from Congress, and then they have been the main opposition parties. Shiv Sena and BJP, they belonged to the Hindu rightist parties, but we see a very different type of a combination of this form. So instead of calling it as Mahagathbandhan, sometimes sarcastically it is said Mahamilawat. So don't use this word but understand this example. Now another thing is what you can mention now quickly, because we have already consumed a lot of space. So now quickly you can make a list of some unique features of Indian coalition experiment. So what you can write, that some of the unique features can be highlighted as following. Okay, so what are the unique features? Fine. For example, lack of, or preferably you can just unique features. Fine. Lack of ideological coherence. Next, oversize coalitions. Negative coalitions. Unstable coalitions, large number of defections, use of money and muscle power. Fine. So you can give another example. You can give the example of Karnataka. In Karnataka, the government BJP had largest number of seats, but the government was of Congress and Janata Dal Secular. However, this government could not continue for more than 14 months and giving rise to the government of BJP. Fine. So there is also one word by Suhas Palashikar, you can note down that such coalitions are termed by Suhas Palashikar as coalition of convenience. Okay, so this is how you have written. Now we have to end this answer. So what you can say that unfortunately India does not represent the example of a healthy coalition culture, with the exception of a state of Kerala, and Manmohan Singh, a former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, has emphasized the importance of adhering to the coalition dharma. So, former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh repeatedly emphasized on the need that the coalition partners should observe coalition dharma. Okay, so it points towards the fact that a healthy coalition culture should be developed and it should also be adhered. And in the end, what you can say that coalition is nothing new or unique to India. It is a regular feature of the continental Europe. Germany gives an example of a healthy coalition culture and a consociational, learn the language and the terms of political science, and the healthy coalition government, a healthy coalition culture, whereas Italy's political culture, Italy's coalition culture is quite unstable and comes closer to the India's coalition culture. And India should take certain institutions from Germany, like constructive vote of no confidence, and if we take necessary reforms like reforming the anti-defection law, electoral reforms, we can address, don't just write coalition, we can address the fundamental problems associated with India's party politics. Okay, so see how many keywords, scholars, ideas, and after this you read your answer and you will love that answer, I am sure. Fine. Okay, you have understood. So in the end, go for, so what is your art, how to bring different ideas, how to connect different ideas. Now let us discuss the next question, and the next question is, to what extent National Human Rights Commission NHRC, to what extent it is appropriate to call NHRC as toothless tiger and suggest ways to reform. Fine. To what extent NHRC is a toothless tiger? So in this question we have to first address this NHRC as a toothless tiger. So I must first understand what is NHRC. Fine. When it was created, then the nature of the institution. Next, purpose. Next, I should understand why it is called as toothless tiger. Okay, so what are the major drawbacks for considering it as a toothless tiger? Then if I know anybody who called it, who calls it as a toothless tiger, this is the information I should be having, and then suggest ways to reform. Fine. Plus this is also a part of this question, to what extent it is appropriate. Fine. So appropriate, this part requires that we should be able to evaluate. First of all, who calls it, whether it is right to call it, and at the same time why it should be a tiger with a teeth to bite. Okay, so reform, or how are we going to be benefited if it is not a toothless tiger, and if we go for the reform of this body. Understand the arena? So I will again make it clear. the question is demanding to find out appropriateness of the view that Nhrc is a toothless tiger. And second thing is suggest steps to reform. Fine. So I have to first give introduction of Nhrc. Okay, and then who calls it a toothless tiger and why? And the thing is, why give the tooth, why to reform, and how to reform. So I will start first with the introduction of Nhrc. What will be your introduction of Nhrc? Most of you will start introduction that Nhrc was created by the Act of Parliament in 1993 in accordance to the Paris Principles. Fine. But this is not the way that you start bombardment on somebody. Introduction doesn't mean just to tell when created, why created, but explain or give introduction also in a perspective. So unlike you all, I will give a different introduction. So number of times the students ask how my answers can be different from the others. Everybody read the same notes. So difference will come when you will put your own ideas. Your own personality should get reflected. Your own way of looking things should get reflected. And you should not be mugging up the facts. You should understand the facts in a perspective. Okay. So instead of Nhrc created in 1993 and this that, I will look into the broad picture, the bigger grand idea behind Nhrc. So I will not throw the baby in the water. I will just tell baby to move in the water slowly. Have you understood this? So introduction of anything can also vary. Here I will be introducing Nhrc. We can introduce Nhrc. After all, what is Nhrc? Nhrc is a oversight body, a sort of a watchdog body to see the culture of human rights is observed, human rights are not violated. Fine. So this is the basic purpose, the protection of human rights. Now the question is, without understanding what is a human right, why it is to be protected, there is no point jumping to this, it was created in this way. Fine. So you should have some sort of purposive introduction of Nhrc. Fine. So what I will do, I will start my answer, Indian government and politics answer. See, if there is a scope to utilize the Constitution and the preamble, and if you can explain all these things in the wide framework of the Constitution, the institutions will start getting aligned. Okay, so what I will write in an introduction, I will write that Indian Constitution is not just a power map. Fine. Unlike other constitutions where the main purpose is to explain the powers of the government, but Indian Constitution is not just a power map, comma, to quote Granville Austin, it is a social document. It is also a social document. It is not just a power map or a legal document. It is a social document with the aim to social document aim to bring a social revolution. Okay, or if you want to cut it short, you can say that unlike other constitutions which are the legal document, Indian Constitution is a social document. It is an approach for changing the society, and it is also known as a transformative constitution. But I think this is a social document. Next point I will write that preamble explains the vision of the entire experiment known as India, known as, you can say, idea of India. Fine. And what vision that I explain, that the ultimate purpose of the experiment is to realize the twin objectives. First is human dignity, and the second is national unity and integrity. Fine. So how will I start? How will I move towards Nhrc? Linking with the constitutional ideals and the provisions. Okay. And then, because I am a political science student, I have a scope to talk theoretically also. So how to write a different answer? You have to think differently. you have to think what all is a possibility, what are different ways we can look at a particular issue. So what you can say that now I will start with the human rights and I will link it with, and what I will say that the entire objective behind the idea of human rights is to give a life of dignity. Fine. And then I will write that the theory of human rights finds its origin in the theory of, I will link it with the theory and I will say that theory of human rights finds its origin in the concept of human dignity described as a categorical imperative by Immanuel Kant. A categorical imperative by Immanuel Kant. Okay. And then I will go little bit into the historical context. So what I will say that the Constitution of India includes the vision of human rights in part 3 and part 4 because the Constitution was written at the time when the idea of human rights was accepted by international community in the form of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is for this reason that in India the fundamental rights are available not just to the citizens but even to the aliens. Okay. Next, I will have to reach to Nhrc. Fine. So what I will say that the Constitution creates independent judiciary and the watchdog institutions like National Commission for Scheduled Castes, National Commission for Scheduled Tribes to ensure that their basic rights are not violated. Fine. Next you write to further strengthen the country's commitment towards the protection of human rights, India has been a party to the Paris Principle, which has resulted into the establishment of the National Human Rights Commission by the law of Parliament in 1993. Okay, so Nhrc has been given a statutory recognition. Okay, then what is the role of NHRC? Fine. Next point, I will discuss the role of NHRC. Fine. Or I will discuss the mandate of NHRC. So some students will learn from Lakshmikant and they will write, this is the mandate, this is the mandate, this is the mandate. No, on the basis of all these, how you understood the mandate, that is important. Fine. So what is the mandate of NHRC? The mandate of NHRC is to strengthen the culture of human rights in India. To strengthen the culture of human rights in India. Fine. How do you strengthen? To sensitize both the administration and civil society about the protection of the rights of the weak and the vulnerable sections, to ensure that those who are in power understand the mandate of the Constitution and act according to the rule of law. Okay. Thus, the aim of NHRC is to prevent the violation of human rights, to strengthen the human rights, and to promote the awareness of human rights. Okay. Now you will write. Now you will come to this question: to what extent it is appropriate to call NHRC as a toothless tiger. So now I will have to shift to this part of the answer. NHRC as a toothless tiger, and they want you to evaluate to what extent it is appropriate to consider NHRC as a toothless tiger. Fine. So to write this, I will first mention that who all have remarked NHRC as the toothless tiger. ठीक है? So you can write about the chairman of NHRC, H.L. Dattu, in 2016 talked about, described NHRC as a toothless tiger. Again, in 2017, Supreme Court, while dealing with the extrajudicial killings of more than 1,000 people in the state of Manipur, has expressed the concern that if government will not go for the adequate response towards Nhrc, it will be reduced to a toothless tiger. Supreme Court even suggested that government should take steps to ensure that the body remains an effective body. Okay? So you can give reference. Next point in your answer, you have to provide the logics for treating Nhrc, logic behind treating Nhrc as a toothless tiger. Fine. So you can also suggest what is the implication of calling Nhrc as a toothless tiger. What does it means? Fine. So when you describe it, when we say Nhrc as a toothless tiger, it basically means that it even after its existence since so long, it has not resulted into any qualitative transformation in the state of human rights in India. Okay. Now, how do we know there is no qualitative transformation? You have to give reference to some authentic sources. Okay. For example, the reports of Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch consistently mention about the violation of human rights in the state of Jammu and Kashmir and in the states of Northeast, primarily in context of Armed Forces Special Power Act. Okay. Next thing is, even the Universal Periodic Review conducted by the UN Human Rights Council points towards the serious human rights issues in India. For example, custodial violence, caste and gender-based violence, the malnutrition, the state of prisons, the poor environment and other conditions, poverty, hunger. So you can say that despite the existence of Supreme Court and the bodies like Nhrc, such situations are continuing. Okay, but you have to come to the main grievance. Main grievance, why it is called as toothless tiger. So from general problems, I will shift to the main grievance. The main grievance is with respect to the section 19 of the Act. Section 19 of the Act of 1993. Fine. And what is there in the section 19? So in section 19, Nhrc is a toothless tiger in context of the atrocities committed by the members of armed forces. Okay. So basically, these bodies are required to protect the citizens from the violations by the state law enforcement agencies like police and armed forces. Nhrc does have the powers with respect to the police, but it does not have powers with respect to armed forces. Okay, and with respect to armed forces, according to section 19, it cannot go for investigation on its own. It has to communicate the concern to the central government, and it has to remain satisfied with the report of the central government. So Nhrc is a toothless tiger. You have to hit at the bull's eye. The main reason is section 19, where it does not have any effective powers to investigate the atrocities on the citizens or the civilians by the armed forces. And you have to write the importance of this provision, that it is to be noted that the bodies like human rights are needed primarily to protect the citizens from the bodies like armed forces and the police. Okay, so that is a main reason. Otherwise, there are some other factors. So in the answer you will write the main reason, some other main reason that it is toothless. It is toothless against the members of armed forces, and you mention section 19. Okay, and uske baad you can mention about some other grievances related to it. What are some other grievances? The other grievances is it does not have all institutions. One common problem is funds, functions and functionaries. So the other grievances is considering its workload, neither it has enough manpower nor it has enough funds. Okay, so other grievances is considering the workload. Fine. Now what is the workload? You can say every year it receives around 1 to 2 lakh complaints. Second thing is it has to spread awareness promote the education of human rights, so people are also aware and those who are in power are also conscious, so it has to spread the awareness. But it does not have, this will require what? Trained manpower, dedicated manpower and the resources. But there comes the constraint. Fine. And since NHRC is checking the government, government will not be very inclined to allocate lot of resources. Fine. So considering the workload, what is the problem? NHRC lacks funds plus functionaries. It has to depend on the union government, or it has to depend on government for the funds and functionaries. Fine. So here you can mention about the section 11 of the Act section 32 of the Act. I will just check of the Act, and section 11 of the Act shows its dependency on government for manpower. Then it shows its dependency on government for finances, and it suffers from the shortages. Okay, so this is how you address the weakness. Now the question demands to what extent it is appropriate to say that it is a toothless tiger. Fine. So I will not go for one-sided answer. I will also write it does have the weakness in terms of funds and functionaries. It is a toothless as far as the armed forces is concerned, but it also has some unique strengths. Don't write one-sided answer. So what you can write? So despite which type of weaknesses it has? Funds and functionaries. We call it as a systemic weakness. So despite its weaknesses, what you will say? That despite the, what are the weaknesses? Funds and functionaries. So despite, we will call it as a systemic weaknesses, it systemic weaknesses in terms of funds and functionaries, it does have certain strength. For example, what are the strong points of India's NHRC strength? First is it can take suo moto cognizance of the violation. It can take action on its own, suo moto cognizance. Next, it can intervene in the proceedings of the court with the permission of the court. with the permission of the court, it has power to visit the prisons for inspection, fine. So it does have some strong points, and it has taken effective action in context of the communal violence in case of Gujarat or Gujarat riots. It has taken effective actions with respect to the state of tribals in Orissa. It has also taken the cognizance of the problem of the migrant laborers because of COVID-19. So these are some good things also you can write. After that, you have to conclude it. So conclude is, you have to suggest the reforms and a way forward. So you have to write first why to reform, fine. So the strengthening of the credibility and effectiveness of Nhrc will not only strengthen the legitimacy of the government, or will not only deal with the legitimation crisis, you can write it down, that ensuring the effectiveness and credibility of Nhrc will not only address, write inverted commas, try to use political science terms, address the legitimation crisis in domestic sphere, it will also improve India's image abroad, fine, and it will help in achieving India's long-term strategic objectives abroad as well as within the country. So it is only in our long-term interest that we should promote the culture of human rights. We should strengthen the institution. Now, what reforms? Obviously, the most important reform is to provide the adequate funds so that it can play the role in spreading the awareness, provide adequate manpower so that the speedy delivery of justice is possible. Some minor disputes should be dealt by or should be settled by the Nhrc itself, and there should not be a need to increase the overload of judiciary. If possible, government can give greater jurisdiction to Nhrc on with respect to the members of armed forces. Fine. Recently, Government of India has amended the Protection of Human Rights Act 1993 and held that it is not necessary that a former CJI has to be a chairperson. Any other judge can also be a chairperson. But at the same time, that Nhrc must include those persons of the civil society who have the track record of commitment towards human rights. So suggestion include increase the staff, increase the funds, because both the two things are needed to increase the awareness. When awareness will come, obviously the violations will reduce, and every case need not to be tackled by the judiciary. Their powers can be increased so that minor issues can be dealt completely by the commission itself, and if situation permits, it can be given greater power on the members of armed forces that will not only bring discipline in the forces, it will also strengthen the credibility. Fine. So this is how you can write the answer, and after listening to the discussion, keep the key points in mind. What are the key reforms, keywords, legitimation crisis, credibility, and see if any thinker from political science can be brought, and write the same answer. Think and write. That's the only way you will develop the art of writing. And I don't know whether you really like the approach of the answers which I am giving or not. So see, you have enough material. There is not much that is to be studied other than the basic facts, but you have to bring the ideas from your inside. You have to have a empathy with the issues. You have to feel it. You have to express the strong feeling and the interest and the intellectual curiosity in context of any topic. So when I say go backward, don't just write. This will give what benefit? This will give an indication that you are somewhere understanding it very deeply. You have an interest, you have an empathy with this particular topic. Okay, so the important facts related to this answer were Protection of Human Right Act 1993, Section 11, Section 19 and Section 32. This relates to manpower, this relates to armed forces, this relates to the funds, then H.L. Dattu's statement, and then Supreme Court's observation. Only with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 line or 10, 12 words you can build a beautiful answer. Okay, so now we will start with the next question. Let us do the question number 6. The question is, give reasons behind Ambedkar's view that CAG is the most important official under the Constitution. Evaluate the working of CAG in the last 70 years. So the question is, give reasons behind behind Ambedkar's view that CAG is the most important official under the Constitution and evaluate the working of CAG in the last 70 years. Fine. So give reasons behind Ambedkar's view that CAG is the most important official under the Constitution. Fine. So Ambedkar has held that CAG is most important authority, and he held that even more important than the judiciary. Fine. Now we have to understand why Ambedkar considered CAG more important than even judiciary. Next is evaluate the working of the CAG. So you also need to understand and have a idea about the features of the institution, then some examples or case studies like 2G spectrum, Colgate, Rafale, and then highlight what are the issues, problematic issues, and what is a way forward. Fine. So these are the components of this particular answer. Now for this particular answer, you have to first establish this point that Ambedkar considered it as most important authority, even more than judiciary. Fine. So we have to first substantiate this argument. How are we going to substantiate this argument? If we straight away write about CAG, its role, Article 148 or 151, we will not be able to write the importance. So in this question is, we have to challenge this, we have to write so that the importance of the CAG is understood. Okay, and CAG is even more important than judiciary. So this answer cannot be written by simply enumerating the articles of the Constitution and simply by explaining CAG has this functions. Fine. You have to put the entire institution in a context. Now, what is the context of the institution of CAG? Normally in Indian government and politics section, you have to start from the form of the government. In the form of the government, where is the role of a particular institution? Fine. So the whole discussion on CAG, I will start with the form of government. Form of government. So Which form of government India has? India has a parliamentary form of government. Fine. Then I will explain what is the core idea of parliamentary form of government. Fine. In a parliamentary form of government, what is the specific thing? The specific thing is executive is responsible to the parliament or legislature on day-to-day basis. Fine. On parliament on day-to-day basis. Fine. So parliamentary form of government is the main thing is responsibility. Second thing is, and through parliament ultimately to the electorate. Fine. So India has adopted a parliamentary form of government. Parliament, in the parliamentary form of government, if you want you can write side by side, in a parliamentary form of government, executive is accountable to the parliament and indirectly to the people of the country. Fine. Next thing what you will write, parliament is the highest institution of accountability in the country. Okay. So parliament is a highest institution of accountability in the country. Why I am writing this? Because I want to analyze the institution of CAG by systems approach, by structural functional approach, by putting the CAG in an environment. Okay, and the environment is the parliamentary form of government. Parliament is a supreme institution of accountability. Okay. Now, when you write, you can underline accountability. Why do we have to create the institution of accountability? So, one line you should write on importance of accountability. What is the importance of accountability? Accountability and transparency is the essential component of the rule of law, essential component of good governance. If accountability does not exist, no good governance is possible. So try to give more weight to the role which CAG has to perform. Okay, so you want good governance, have accountability. Which is the supreme institution of accountability? Parliament. Okay, because good governance is not possible. And then write about CAG. CAG is a official, Comptroller and Auditor General is a official which plays the most critical role in helping or enabling the parliament to fulfill its responsibility. Fine. So in Indian political system, most important institution is Parliament, and Parliament's function is accountability. Now the most important accountability is financial accountability, to ensure that the money of the taxpayer is used not only for the purpose it is allocated, according to the principle no taxation without representation, as well as in an efficient manner. Okay. And what is the importance of the CAG in the entire system? The importance of the CAG in the entire system is the CAG's reports, which have to be considered by the Public Account Committee, becomes the main tool for Parliament to hold government accountable. Okay. This is how you explain the rationale of the institution. Okay. So how will you start this answer? Parliament is the ultimate institution of accountability. The most important dimension of accountability is financial, without which good governance is not possible, and in this context emerge the role of CAG, which enables the Public Account Committee to look after the financial accountability and the lapses. Okay. And then you come to the Ambedkar's view. This makes CAG the most important official in India, even more than judiciary. Okay. Why? Because what is India's specific situation? That you have to understand. So, because India is a poor country with the limited resources and huge responsibilities, where still the large number of people live below the poverty line, it becomes all the more important that the public money is spent in accordance to the grant permitted by the Parliament, as well as in the most economic and in the most efficient manner. Okay. Now you have to link it with the constitutional provisions. Fine. So here you can write, according to Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, the first vice president and the prominent scholar, the role of CAG is critical as a watchdog. Sometimes the office, while executing the duties of the office, his position is that of embarrassment. Why embarrassment? Because CAG has to hold the government executive accountable. Okay. So not only Ambedkar, even Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, has explained the importance of the institution, and then you give the provisions of the constitution related to the institution of CAG. So what will you write? That Article 148 to 151 deals with the institution of CAG. CAG is with the institution of CAG, and then write a overview of these articles. What will be the overview? So if we see the system of appointment, salary, allowances, and the system of removal, we can come to this conclusion that the constitution aims to create a highly autonomous body in the form of CAG. So give a covering note, and then you write the provisions of the constitution, that CAG is appointed by the president under the authority and his seal. CAG cannot be removed from the office except in the manner meant for the judges of Supreme Court and High Court. The expenditure of his office and his salary and allowances are the expenditures charged upon the Consolidated Fund of India. CAG is not allowed to take any further occupation under any of the government after retirement. Now these provisions show that Constitution aimed to create a very powerful institution, and in a way more powerful than Election Commission. Fine. After this, you can also write that the CAG's powers, responsibility are further given in the Act passed by the Indian Parliament, known as Duties, Powers and Conditions of Service Act 1971. Fine. So next you will have to write constitutional provisions from 148 to 151. Fine. You just write the summary of it, and then CAG's duties, powers and conditions of Service Act 1971, which has been amended later on, also explain its mandate. Besides this, another factual information is regarding the audit rules. There are regulations of audit and account 2007. Fine. So DPC has been amended in 71, 76, 84, 87, 94. If you remember, it's fine, otherwise you can just leave it. So these constitutional provisions, the Parliament Act and the regulation, along with certain judgments of Supreme Court, have given shape to the mandate and to the stature of the institution. Okay, so here you can write you can give the reference to two important judgments of the Supreme Court. Fine. First is Arvind Gupta versus Union of India case 1971. Second, Association of United Tele-Services Providers versus Union of India 2014. Fine. In these two cases, Supreme Court has expressed the opinion that the Constitution does not put any limitation on the mandate of CAG so far its accountability responsibilities are concerned. Fine. And most importantly, in this case, court said that the government has to respect the institution of CAG because CAG is not the accountant or munim of the government. Munim of the government. So, Article 148 to 151, Duties, Powers and Conditions of Service Act 71, amended again and again, and then the audit rules and regulations and Supreme Court's judgment in Arvind Gupta case and United Tele-Services Providers case clarifies that the position of CAG is not of the munim. There is no constitutional limitation on its mandate. And you can say the context of these legal debates was whether CAG has to perform whether CAG can perform the performance audit or CAG's mandate is limited to the compliance audit. Okay. Now after this you can write further that at present CAG goes for the compliance audit, financial audit and performance audit. Fine. And then what you will write that considering the trend of citizen-centric governance, the CAG has also institutionalized the concept of social audit. Fine. Now, if you want to quote on the importance of the institution, you can give reference of the former CAG Vinod Rai and his book. Okay. So after this you give reference to the Vinod Rai and his book. So you can just write that former CAG Vinod Rai in his book. What is the title of his book? Rethinking Good Governance. Rethinking Good Governance, call CAG as the fifth pillar of democracy. Fifth pillar of democracy, and says that CAG is the most important institution to maintain credibility of the government in the eyes of the people. So this is how you can elaborate on Ambedkar's view that CAG is the most important authority. Now the second part of the question is evaluate the functioning of the CAG. Fine. So what we will see, in the 70 years of the existence of the Republic, CAG has provided extremely professional service, one of the most professional institutions in the country. However, from the very beginning, we have seen controversies arising with context to the CAG reports. The controversies are there since the time of Pandit Nehru. There was a controversy over the allocation for the defense during the time of Pandit Nehru in context of China. It is said that if government had paid attention to the CAG's recommendations, we would have minimized the losses. CAG has reported, or the report of CAG on 2G spectrum, on Colgate, then in recent time on Rafale, the reductive pricing has further brought the institution under the controversy time and again, sometimes for the act of commission, for example 2G spectrum, sometimes for the act of omission, for example in case of Rafale. Fine. So the history of the institution is not free from controversies. Since CAG limits the freedom of executive prefers to limit the powers of the CAG. Number of times the Prime Ministers, for example Manmohan Singh, repeated that the performance audit does not come within the scope of CAG's power. Or CAG should not be interfering in the policy matters. That is not the mandate. Fine. Now, to make your answer academic, you can give reference to the views of, you can write the views of, R. Sridharan, views of R. Sridharan, and in which book? A very important book, that is Rethinking Public Institutions in the country. Rethinking Public Institutions in India. Just wait a minute. Yeah. So, I'll show you the book. This is the book, Rethinking Public Institutions in India. So, a very important book edited by Devesh Kapoor, Pratap Bhanu Mehta and Milan Vaishnav. Fine. So, in this book, R. Sridharan has made the assessment of the working of the CAG over the last 70 years. You can note down, right? According to R. Sridharan, the impact of the institution on the government, impact of the institution on governance is marginal. So, CAG could have made only marginal influence. Fine. Write further. He writes that despite its independence, quality of its personnel, knowledge, resources, diligence, quality of persons, independence, knowledge, resources, diligence, and its enviable organizational culture. Fine. So, what is R. Sridharan's theme? Despite independence, expertise, organizational culture, man of talent, yet this organization could have made very limited influence on the quality of governance in the country in checking the misappropriation of the funds. Okay. Similarly, to authenticate your answer, you can also give reference to the 14th report of second ARC on Financial Management Chapter 8. ठीक है. This report also highlight which type of weakness? The systemic weakness in the institution. Now, what is a systemic weakness? And out of these weaknesses, if you will address it, you can give more substance to the institution. So what are systemic weakness? Point number 1, the system of appointment is still, the appointment is controlled by executive, and there have been occasions when such persons have been appointed as a CAG which lagged, or for against whom there has been a question mark of integrity. Fine. This goes against the principle that Caesar's wife should be above suspicions. Hence, it is suggested that only man of integrity and not the committed bureaucrats should hold this position. Fine. And it is said that if the committed bureaucrats rather than the man of integrity hold this institution, there will be a transformation from a watchdog to lapdog, obedient lapdog. We don't want that institution. So first, there is a fault in the system of appointment, and that needs to be tackled. Now, the second thing which is mentioned even in the report, and which is always raised again and again, that the problem is lack of cooperation on the part of the ministries. So CAG does not get the timely response. When the CAG does not get the timely response from the ministry, the reports get delayed. Reports get delayed to the extent that number of times they get delayed to the extent that number of times the reports become irrelevant. Next point is, hence it is suggested that the maximum within, let me see, within the delay of, or maximum within 30 days, ministry should respond. So unlike Right to Information Act, where the officials have to respond in a stipulated time, otherwise they will be penalized, no such provision is there which needs to be done. Next thing is, after long delay, the reports are laid, and then also there is a then also there is a delay on laying the report on the floor of the house. It is suggested maximum 7 days it should be laid. Once it reaches to the Public Accounts Committee, number of times we see lack of interest or the lack of capacity among the parliamentarians with respect to these reports. Hence, it happens to be a wasteful exercise. Okay, so necessary reforms are needed. There is a need to build the trust between the executive and CAG. CAG is a watchdog, not a bloodhound. And there is a need that members of parliament also understand the importance. A time limit has to be prescribed for the departments to respond and for laying down the reports. And in India, the role of comptroller and general is more of a, or it is hardly a role of a comptroller. So like in Britain, the role of comptroller should also be added. No money should be taken out of the fund in India, consolidated fund, without his permission, because right now his reports are like the post-mortems. Okay, so sooner it is, better it is to reform the institution of CAG. In the end, you can mention the statement, a view of Veerappa Moily, who was the Union Minister of Law. As well as the chairperson of a second Nhrc. You can note down, the spirit of inquiry is so central to democracy that is to be accepted. The spirit of inquiry is central to democracy. Full stop. CAG is a body designed to act as a bulwark against the omissions and commissions of the executive under the supervision of legislature. I am repeating it again. The spirit of inquiry is central to the democracy. CAG is a constitutional body to act as a bulwark against omissions and commissions of executive under the supervision of legislature. To conclude, we can say CAG helps in deterring, DETER, deterring, detecting and taking remedial steps. Okay, if you want, you can start this answer with a quote of Kautilya, because earlier on the website of CAG this quote was given. This also highlights the importance of the role of the CAG. You can write that quote, you can start in the beginning and then you start your answer. The quote is from Kautilya. There are 2-3 quotes which you can use in CAG's answer. Fine. So in CAG answer you can use Vinod Rai, Veerappa Moily, second ARC report, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan, Ambedkar. And now I am to begin with, you can start with any of the quote of Kautilya. For example, the means of embezzlement are 40. Means there are so many ways of corruption and the task is not so easy, and if executive doesn't cooperate, it will create a problem. Second, it is easy to detect the movements of the bird, flying in the sky, but not easy to detect when officials have committed the corruption. Okay, I hope you have understood this. Fine. So in CAP, why it is so important? You can write that Parliament is important. Most important role of Parliament is financial accountability. CAC helps Parliament in fulfilling that particular role, and in India it is all the more important because India has a welfare state and you are a country with the limited resources. And then the constitutional design, and also you can give reference to the book of Pratap Bhanu Mehta, Rethinking the Public Institutions. Okay, so I hope you are understanding how to write the answers and how to give the relevant content. Okay.